Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Please leave your name and where you're joining us from in the chat, and the session will start in a couple of minutes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This session will be starting soon. Please let us know where you are joining us from and your name in the chat if you wish. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are just about to start our session, and please let us know where you're joining us from and your name in the chat if you wish. My name is Ilaria Boncori, and I'm really delighted to send you a really warm welcome from the CMS in Touch team. We will be recording this session, and it will be available on YouTube, on our YouTube channel thereafter. CMS in Touch, as you may know, is stemming from the CMS division of the Academy of Management and the Journal Organization. And the CMS in Touch platform is a space for us to engage in conversations around critical management studies, but also promote events, special issues, new books, edited books or manuscripts, and also professional development workshops that our community might be interested in engaging with. So keep an eye on our social media. We are on X, used to be Twitter, and on LinkedIn, so you can keep an eye on our social media channels so you can be up to date with our future events. If you would like to organize something for your special issue or your new book, please get in touch with us. We're always happy to consider new events. We run about 2 events a month during the year, so please get in touch with any of us through our email. You can see at the bottom of the screen is cmswebinars@gmail.com, and we'll respond as soon as possible. So today's event is just absolutely delightful for me to introduce. We have a great team here, and I will leave it to Mats to introduce the session and the panelists. So we will have presentations from the team, and then we will have some time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to add some questions to the Q&A function. As I said before, don't worry if you're missing out any of the information. The session is being recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. So without any further ado, Mats and team, would you like to join us?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, wherever you are. And thank you, Iliara and Sarah, for setting this up. My name is Mats Fred. I'm at the Political Science Department, Lund, Sweden. and I am one of the editors of the book together with Sebastian Godenhjelm, who I think also is part of the seminar here today. And there are also, so we are two or three presentations, short presentations today. From me, I will try to introduce the book as well as the concept of projectification, if you are not familiar with that. And then we have Malin Mc Glinn from Malmö University, who will present her chapter, and Peeter Vihma from Helsinki, who will present his chapter. And then we have also Stephen Wolf coming all the way from US. This is like in the middle of the night, more or less, for you. So we're very happy that you could join us in breakfast. And we also have Martina Huemann, who will comment and discuss. And yeah, and then we also invite you all to be part of this discussion. But so in this book, I would show you, I only have one slide. We would try to do this without a bunch of slides to not mess up the technique. And I try to, there we go, share. So I just wanted to show you sort of the book and all the content of the book, so you can absorb that while I speak a little bit. So in this book, we gather researchers interested in what we call then projectification. And for us, this is a concept that aims to capture an increasing reliance on the project in contemporary societies. So, and I will try to briefly introduce this concept, but also the idea of the book. So for me, should I leave that a little bit? So I can leave it just a little bit more. So for me, sort of the entry point to this field of projectification came a few years ago when I worked as an evaluator. I evaluated a range of different kinds of projects. Most of them were EU-funded projects. I think that Malin will touch upon this later on. And these are projects that aim to take people out of unemployment or battle social exclusion or something like that. And as an evaluator, I sort of appeared to come across the same or very similar projects over and over and over again, despite the fact that these projects should be sort of creative and innovative in order to receive funding. And also despite the fact that these projects, so that the result of the projects were supposed to be taken care of or implemented in some ordinary operations. And of course, as an evaluator, this was very frustrating to see the same projects over and over again, and my evaluation reports started to look the same. But as a researcher, I found it very interesting. So I did a small study a few years ago together with two colleagues. And what we found in this study was that it was more common that these kinds of projects resulted in new projects than that the result of them were taken care of in any organization. So one project led to another project that led to another project that led to another project, and so on. So here you can imagine that I started to think about this in terms of projectification. And so let's get rid of that. And so as I did then, and as I think that many of us with this interest came across Christopher Midler's research on Renault, the car manufacturer, and their transformation from a traditional industrial organization to an organization consisting of a range of autonomous project teams. And he then talked about the projectification of the firm, or what later on I think came to be known as organizational projectification, sort of more related to a specific organization. And what I really like about his writing on Renault is not only sort of the transformation of the organization to a number of projects, but also sort of the processes of adaptation that everything surrounding all these projects, or Renault as an organization, had to undergo as a consequence of these transformations. So there were administrative routines had to be changed, budgeting procedures, the hiring of people, you know, what kind of expertise and expert do we want or do we need in this organization now that it is organized according to a bunch of different projects. But also all the subcontractors, of course, they had to adapt to an organization that are organized in several organizations. So they had to sort of change somehow. So all of a sudden they didn't have like a specific organization, but a large, yeah, you get the point. And I think that for me, this is sort of, these processes are essential. That projectification is not, at least not only about a large number of projects, but it is about transformation, it is about adaptation, but also about how people talk about, describe, and present what they do in terms of project, or according to some sort of project logic, perhaps. And I think that part of this is captured in Johan Packendorf and Monica Lindgren, two Swedish researchers. They wrote about a division between a narrow and a broad definition of projectification, where the narrow referred to the projectification of a specific organization, like the one in the Renault case, and the broader definition of projectification then relates to a more sort of multifaceted cultural and discursive phenomena. Then to sort of try to develop this further, I think, and also to try to make sense of this more, I think I also enjoy Beata Jalosha and Jakobsens. They talk about 4 different views of projectification. I won't go into detail, but they have like a managerial approach. I think that is sort of also related to sort of the Renault case, where you have an idea that we should rearrange our organization according to a set of projects. And they talk about the societal trend. This is like related to the project society. This is a trend that we organize everything according to a certain project logic, or the way that we see a bunch of projects. And they talk about a human state. I think that is more related to the individual, the micro level, how we as individual, the consequences or effects on us as individuals when the society is organized, or the sort of context in which we are influenced or heavily influenced by a project idea or logic. And they also talk about a philosophical issue, projectification as a philosophical issue. So, but in this book, I hold it upside down. In this book, I think we all, the authors in this, adhere to the more notion of a wider or broader conceptualization of projectification. And I also think that we capture these different views that are presented by Jalosha and Jakobson. And even though we have different sort of academic backgrounds, the authors in the book, we come from political science, philosophy, business administration, human relation, and urban studies, we have in common sort of the interest in the phenomena that we call projectification as something more than just an organizational form or function. So to say something more here, I think we, in aggregate, I think we wrote in the introduction, we have devoted more than 40 years to this phenomena. I think that's at least sounds very impressive. And each chapter is built also on at least 4 years of research. So it is rather sort of extensive research in the book. And I also want to emphasize that even though the chapters are built upon PhD research, they are not, according to me at least, sort of boring summaries of large, impossible to read PhD theses. So each chapter represents sort of a core theoretical argument with some empirical illustrations. But what should be mentioned also is that what we have in common is that we all come from sort of the Nordic countries. And maybe we can come back to that later in the discussion, what that has for impact on the way on the research, and if this sort of could travel, and well, yeah, we can come back to that. I think we do in the introduction of the book sort of flirt a little bit with the Scandinavian School of Management and also the Scandinavian institutionalism, and we argue in the introduction that this might be or could be talked about as like a first step towards perhaps a Scandinavian school of projectification. Yeah, I think I will stop there as a presentation of the book and the phenomenon. Hopefully you get some sense of what it is that we're trying to do here. So now I will leave first to Malin Mc Glinn, who has written one of the chapters in the book, and later on to Peeter Vihma. and they will introduce themselves and give some like a brief example. And yeah, so Malin, I leave the floor or the scene to you.
The electronic space of the web. Hi everyone, nice to be here. It's very hard to kind of digest a lot of work into a 5 minutes presentation. So I'm just going to give you a few examples, and hopefully, you know, your questions are obviously not limited to what I talk about, but for time reasons. So the focus in my chapter were on specific projects. Mats briefly mentioned the European Union, the European Social Fund. So all of my projects were so-called ESF projects. And these projects were put in place, or they all tried to tackle one problem, and that is to break segregation and social exclusion. So the projects then become like the means to try to get at these issues. And they become these labor market projects where a lot of hope and finances goes into, you know, identifying project participants who are then kind of, I don't know, weeded out in terms of where they live in so-called vulnerable areas. So these projects aim to help people become employable. So like Mats pointed to a bit, my critique or the kind of point of departure for me was never to judge projects per se and say if they're good or bad. Rather, they, like one of our colleagues and contributors to this book, Anders Jensen, he kind of termed it the project society that Mats also mentioned here. And I took this to kind of mean some systemic and or system of governance that is inherently built on like very short-term solutions. So it becomes like ad hoc solutions to and this compression of time. And these projects also, like Matt said, they kind of pitch themselves to be unique. But I must have read maybe thousands of project descriptions, and they actually are nearly all the same. So by that I mean they have the same objectives, and they're funded in similar ways. They are funded in the same ways. So when I talk about projectification in my chapter, it is this version of projectification that I mean, this way of governing. And I believe that it has an impact on how these bigger, larger, serious questions of, you know, social inclusion are dealt with on a political and also practical level. So another point of departure for me, because I didn't really know anything about these ESF projects. My research interest was born out of, I just went to different meetings at the university in Malmö and Lund. I went to the city hall, and everywhere you saw these stickers were said, sponsored by the European Social Fund. So I thought, what is this phenomenon that I've never heard of? So from a methodological perspective, I was driven by some curiosity, and I decided, like I put it in my chapter, to use the method of following projects about. So that's what I did. I read like descriptions, I looked at budgets, I interviewed people, and tried to like make sense of these projects. So I asked questions like, what problems were they trying to solve? How were they funded? What was the funding spent on? Who did they target? Who benefited from them? How were results measured? How were they communicated? And how were these promoted? So while considering these projects then, like I name my chapter after this, I was looking at these projects and thinking, what's going on really? And the metaphor that came into my mind was the image of a clock on a wall. So when hanging there on the wall, telling the time and ticking away, we can't really see what's happening inside. But if you open it up, you see all these gear wheels turning in harmony to drive this kind of machine forward. And that's kind of what I took with me and said, well, what makes these projects tick? Because we wouldn't have thousands of them, was my reasoning, if they didn't fill a function. So just a few suggestions what I came up with for what might be what made them tick would be that this way of governing for me makes these projects like how do I put it? They make doing good and doing business a quite inseparable exercise, because helping through different kind of sustainable ways, that's how they were that's how they were worded by project leaders. But it was also very clear that it's not just humanitarian for nothing, because it's a big business. So let's call maybe that a moral economy. Secondly, these projects would never see daylight if there weren't of these many varied calculative accounting practices. And I write that it was like numbers of exclusion, and that is the social benefits of the project participants. These numbers were like translated or converted into these numbers of inclusion, that being the funding for the European Social Fund. So you need to find a problem, and then you need to finance it. Also, I found that it was these EU-funded projects were in many ways based on a certain, and I call it arrangements of visibility. That means that success needed to be spread and promoted for, projects to lead to more projects and more funding. And I came up with this term catwalk empowerment that I use and trying to think about these so-called happy project participants who openly have to thank the European Social Fund for having changed their lives. So there are many practices at work here that obviously it's hard to talk about in 5 minutes. But I think my time is running out. So I'm just going to say as a final remark that I do believe that when you look at projects in this way and follow them about and find out how they really function, has been the way that in which I would like to critique these kinds of projects, because I have had a first row view of how they actually work. And if we know how they work, I believe that we can offer some kind of political, I'll say, some critique of who benefits from these projects and what do they do in a larger scale of politics.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Malin. So please write your questions or comments if you like. You don't have to ask some questions. You can just have like reflections or comments and do that in the Q&As or in the chat. And I will leave the floor then to Peeter Vihma.
Thank you. And hello, everyone. Nice to be here. I am presenting you briefly chapter 9 of the book Interfaces in Project-Based Innovation Systems, which I wrote, which is based on my PhD dissertation done in Helsinki University and Cornell. And now I gathered new material for this chapter specifically, now that I'm working in Tallinn Technical University. And my chapter uses the projectification lens to look at the broad topics of digitalization and public sector innovation, and which both are buzzwords today, as you will know. And digitalization especially stands out as something people really like. It's exciting, it is flashy, and so the project work methods that stemmed from the field of IT, such as Agile or Scrum methods, are also conceived very exciting and flashy. And in my chapter, I look at one particular method, the hackathon, which was originally used in software development in the 90s, but is now increasingly used to solve all sorts of problems, also in the social, in the public sphere. For example, in Estonia, where I base my material, partly probably because of the country's general digital optimism. So this kind of civic hackathons have been organized for solving various problems, such as problems of rural peripheries or problems of Ukrainian refugees. In my particular case, the hackathon was meant to solve the problem of the use of timber. Timber resource is prominent in Estonia, but you can imagine that the sustainability concerns have stirred quite a bit of tensions in the policy networks and prompted sort of a need for innovation. And as these digitally inspired project methods are thrown at increasingly bigger societal challenges, and I'm asking, do they live up their hype, or what kind of innovation can they provide? And the lens that I'm using here is to look at the interfaces between the projects and the permanent organizations, which is, and by interfaces, I mean the structures that guide interaction between them. So they can be program description or liaison officers or even boundary objects. But what they do is that they guide the legitimacy of the project problem definitions and the ensuing results. They regulate how cognitively close or distant are the working relationships, and how flexible is the knowledge management between the temporary and the permanent organization. So the hackathon, which I'm talking about, organized by the Timber Industries and Ministry of Economic Affairs in Estonia, so they wanted to find a more efficient use for timber, but the team that I analyzed was too creative. It actually stated that the best value for the Estonian forest was when it was standing. So basically they offered an offsetting scheme. It was quite innovative in Estonian context. It was potentially even disruptive, and they won the hackathon. But their out of the box thinking, it actually created issues with legitimacy, because there was no liaisons between the hackathon event and the ministry. There was like no civil servant part of the problem definition, for example. And sure, like the hackathon team was endorsed by a very high level. For the president of Estonia endorsed the results, but and for the project team, this was a sign of legitimacy. But for the Ministry of Environment, it was definitely not. And so there was no, they didn't establish any working relationships with the ministry. So the civil servants working there had on carbon issues, for example, had no idea why these bright-eyed people were trying to interfere with their work. And of course, to make it more difficult, the Ministry of Economic Affairs, which was organizing the hackathon, had no contracts or shared mission with the Ministry of Environment that was in charge of the carbon issues. And so the project team was not able to use this short window of opportunity to start policy change. And this is, of course, a general problem of projectification, that the planned obsolescence and the challenges that it creates for knowledge management. So I guess that this analysis of interfaces, the structures of interaction, is definitely relevant for understanding the dynamics of innovation. And it also helps to critically view the potential of these IT-inspired methods. Well, I think hackathons can support innovation, and they're very good at solving technical problems. But I'm skeptical if they're able to solve very complex problems. And these are important questions now that we have to deal with this kind of a mission-led public administration that uses this kind of very fluid and flexible hackathon teams. So I hope that, well, maybe these kind of questions help to solve these challenges that we may have. And I think projectification lens is a good way of looking at them. Thank you for this attention.
Thank you so much, Peter. Excellent presentation. Thank you also again, Malin. So now you have been introduced a little bit to the phenomena of projectification. Hopefully, you've been introduced to the book. You've given some examples of chapters. So now we are extremely honored to have Martina Huemann, and later on also Stephen Wolf, two excellent researchers who have been given the task to comment and or raise some issues or questions related to this. Martina, I could spend a massive amount of time introducing you, but I think that you perhaps will do that better than me. So I leave the floor to you, Martina.
Thank you, Matt. I will do that very, very briefly. So I'm professor at UCL in UK, and I'm also professor at Vienna University of Economics. And since 2018, I'm editor of International Journal of Project Management. That gives me also kind of a broad overview what is going on in project management research. And thank you, Mats, for inviting me to have a look into your book and also comment on it, which is impossible. Yeah, so kind of because there's so many different very nice conversations and topics that you're dealing with that I will be very, very selective and probably only relate to what was said here earlier. What I especially like is this very different and refreshing approach, because I'm coming from a very managerial perspective on the topic of projects. But you also integrate philosophy, you also integrate very much the change perspective. And this is something that is also covered in my research. Yeah, so I'm actually very much interested in how far projects are agents for change or agents for transition. Yeah, and this was very much touched by both of the presenters so far, as well Peter, as also Malin. They were talking just in different contexts, yeah, very nicely describing how the project is actually used as a, you call it vessel, you call it agent, you can call it means, yeah. I would not call it temporary organization, to introduce change, to create change, to introduce change to a society, in a first case, a vulnerable region, in the second case, also kind of for a society to solve some problems. And you can see the power and you can see the limitations. Yeah. So for me, the power is very much that you can concentrate on what you're doing. You also have a reason why something needs to be financed. Yeah. So this was, I think this is a very, very good reason to kind of also have a project and be very clear what you're going to deliver. And on the other hand, in the case of the hackathon, you also see the restriction of being temporary. And for me, the hackathon, yeah, is probably only one method. The question for me is, how comprehensive has this been kind of built up? How comprehensive had that been framed as a project? Yeah. And so for me, for being successful in delivering change, it always needs to also be a little bit more comprehensive and go maybe a step further than what you think, and also include these civil servants in some way or the other. Might not be that easy, yeah? Because these will be the ones that will need to do the change afterwards. Yeah, so that leads me to the other topic, which I think for me, projects are spaces for co-creation. And when I'm talking about co-creation, it is not only within the project team and the project organization, but also with the relevant stakeholders. Yeah. So for me, this is a very important means to really be able to create this change. Yeah. Because I believe that with projects, we are creating futures, and we are creating hopefully sustainable futures. Yeah. This is what fascinates me on projects. And the question is how good the organization, the society is equipped. Yeah. And Mats, you were mentioning that if you introduce projects into an organization, yeah, there's a lot of irritation. Yeah, because line organization and projects as temporary organization, they have a different management logic. Yeah, so the one is following the annual controlling cycles, and the other one is following the milestones. They have very different rhythm, yeah, in the way of how they're working, how they're functioning. And to kind of combine that in an organization is a challenge. And I think it's a challenge that many organizations have not solved yet completely, and probably will not solve completely, but can be aware that they need to tackle with. And the same is on the society level. Yeah, the question will also be how many projects. So this is coming to my questions to you. So how many projects do you expect? Yeah, is there a limit to projectification? I would think there is. Yeah, not everything is worthwhile to make a project out of it. So where's the limit of projectification, and what is actually needed in a change, not only of the organizations, but also of the individuals, of the mindset of the individuals, that they can live with projects. Yeah? So I think there's also a very big difference between projects within organization when employees still have a kind of a permanent contract with the organization. And then if you have these freelance projects where kind of the people are really nomads and they're just kind of hopping from one project to the other. Yeah. So summarizing my questions is there a limit to projectification? What do you say? How can we actually equip people in this project society? Yeah. So what is needed to help them to come through? Because one of my recent research is that I'm looking into sustainable project careers, and sustainability there is differentiated in 3 items. The one is productive, happy, and healthy. And we can see, looking into our data, that project professionals, they're very productive. Most of them are quite happy or very happy, but they might not be that healthy. Yeah. So this is my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martina. Excellent comments and great questions also, and huge questions, of course. But I think that we save the questions and the discussion to later, right? And hopefully not only me will be responsible for participating in answering these or go through these questions. But next presenter or commentator or discussant, I don't know really what to call your role here, but Stephen, we are extremely happy that you woke up extra early to participate in this event today. So I leave the floor to you, Stephen.
Okay, very good. Thanks to all of you, and congratulations to the publisher, the editors, and to all of the authors. And it's great to be with you. I want to start by offering just some kind of big picture comments about how I come to this topic. So I'm a professor at Cornell University in the Department of Natural Resources and the Environment. And I'm always interested in questions of environmental governance. And in this field where I think it's fair to say we have significant urgency associated with social and technical change, the idea of projects and projectification as a kind of potential mechanism for accelerating and expanding knowledge creation and productive change is an exciting idea. I think intellectually, and I really liked how Matt started our webinar today with this intellectual history. And I think it's fair to say that the project and projectification literature, it emerged from corporate and commercial and private sector considerations. And I think I understand the Nordic school of projectification to be very much founded on an interest in the implications of projectification for public administration and the migration of project logic into the public sector. My work as a researcher in the field of environmental governance and teaching environmental governance, where governance is defined as the interplay between state and non-state actors, invites the question about how projectification can inform our understanding of the kind of interactions and the spaces that encompass both private and public and civil society organizations. And so this idea of a kind of historical emergence from private to public, and now a kind of governance logic of the kind of efforts to break down silos and to create cross-sectoral dialogue and to harness the capabilities and the energy and the resources of different segments of society becomes quite relevant. So I come to projectification with an interest on the one hand in innovation studies, which I think was quite clear in Peter's chapter about the hackathon, and the other axis would be governance. And I think Malin's interest in urban concerns about social inclusion and labor market inclusion have direct relevance to this. So I understand projects as knowledge management organizations or knowledge management strategies. And as we come to respect and appreciate the value of interdisciplinary interactions and cross-sectoral interactions, as I mentioned previously, it becomes quite important. And as an example, we can imagine problems of sustainability, where we're interested in, for example, what we call nexus thinking. So addressing in an integrated way the problems of food, water, and energy, all of which make demands on landscapes, and not trying to understand and address these problems in isolation, but in their interaction. So then we see in this kind of nexus thinking and sustainability logic that, hey, our problems are really complex and we can't address them in silos. We need a much more integrated and nimble, Peter's word, approach. And so projects have great relevance, I think, applied to the challenge of sustainability. We know that there's other terms and literatures out there. For example, in my world, people talk about experimentalist governance or adaptive governance. And I think projectification is a member of this family of kind of ideas and concerns and strategies for accelerating and diversifying the way we address social problems. And I think that we should recognize projectification as part of good company in this respect. I think when we think about innovation, and I really think that it's a great fit, that this book with CMS is a really great fit with the field of critical management studies, because it's not just a question of innovating more or innovating faster, but it's really a question of innovating with purpose and innovating with a sense of democratic values and social inclusion. And so I believe Sebastian Godenhjelm, co-editor, and was responsible in part, maybe with Stefan Sjöblom, I'm not sure I know the whole history, of two terms that I've always found very useful. One is democratic surplus, and the other is innovation surplus. And so I think we should be asking these questions. Do projects deliver a democratic surplus and or an innovation surplus, and in what contexts? This idea of a projectification, I think historically can be understood as a kind of antidote or maybe a complement to bureaucracy. Malin used the term adhocracy in her remarks. This is a term that Toffler used, the famous futurist in the 70s, applied to a kind of vision of using computers to address social problems in real time. So instead of relying on large, lazy, bloated bureaucracies, we would live in a digital world that he anticipated as being kind of just-in-time approach to cobbling together teams composed of the right expertise and the right resources. And those teams would address social problems and then disband when those problems had been addressed or mitigated. And so if we think of projectification as a kind of alternative to bureaucracy or as a complement to bureaucracy, I think it's quite important. The other comment I'd like to make is related to interfaces, which is central to Peter's remarks, and it's central to the work that I've done with Johan Munck-Rosenskjold, who's one of the authors and here with us today. I think it's useful to think about let's say, weak projectification and strong projectification. And Johan has his own typology, which is similar and quite useful. And both of these, I think, are related to March's very famous arguments about the exploitation versus exploration frontier. And so weak projects describes a situation where the projects don't enjoy much autonomy, that they're on a short leash from the permanent and the incumbent organizations in the policy field. And weak projectification can be critiqued as a kind of uninteresting, kind of technical implementation logic, where the projects don't have real possibilities for disruptive knowledge production and change. And we can contrast the weak projectification with the strong, and the strong would describe a situation with lots of autonomy. And this can lead exactly to where Peter's logic came to, which is you can have these independent projects that produce innovative, disruptive ideas, but if they don't have the right interface to the existing policy field, those ideas and that knowledge and those capabilities can languish and fall through the cracks and not be absorbed. And so I think this idea of trying to understand the relationship between projects and the members, the incumbents or the permanent organizations, remains a very fertile area. And with that, I'd like to turn to two questions directed specifically to Peter and Malin about that relate to my comment. So for Malin, you offered a very nice critical assessment about the lack of novelty and the lack of context specificity you observed in these EU projects. But I'd like to ask you, and I know you said you didn't want to judge projects as good or bad, and I appreciate that, but I would like to ask you about, does your empirical studies, or what does your empirical studies tell us about the idea of democratic surplus and social inclusion? And did you see a positive or let's say an optimistic element to this idea of using projects to bring the concerns and social problems of people on the ground to be more relevant and to be addressed in a more effective manner? Or is that just a kind of romantic ideal that is not observed? And for Peter, and Malin, I would ask, what types of research strategies could we use to go further to understand this question? And Peter, addressing what you know well, this temporary versus permanent and the interfaces that connect them, your outcome of the hackathon was very comedic and ironic. I loved it. But this idea of, can you offer us any design principles for interfaces, and what types of research should we be conducting to better understand what types of interfaces should we be analyzing, and what types of questions should we ask? And with that, I say thanks and I stop.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Excellent comments and reflections, and also great questions. And maybe we should go for them directly. And Malin, if you want to respond to that, we start with you, Malin, and then Peter.
Yeah, thank you. I really like this democratic surplus. So I'll give you an example. I don't know if this is, I've become kind of cynical, which is never a good thing, right? Well, it can be good, but I guess it depends what you do with that cynicism. These projects, like, on the one hand, the projects that I studied, they work very well. And they're extraordinary in one aspect. And that is that they produce a labor market for project leaders. Yeah. So, I mean, in that way, I kind of critically, using Karl Marx, that popular guy, use that, because what I saw in these kind of cynical calculations is that the system actually kind of constructed the same thing that the system wanted to take away. Because I make this comment, and I can do it in this room because no one can throw a tomato at me, is that a lot of these people, and these are people who have migrated to Sweden, who live in these deprived neighborhoods, and these are the people, the bodies, the neighborhoods that are targeted specifically. So they create a lot of work for project leaders, project managers. So have this likeness, you know, what do you need to construct a chair? Well, maybe you need wood, and you need, you know, things like that. But actually what makes them tick is that you have unemployed people that you want to help. So that's why I mean, like, if all the social exclusion had disappeared, and if everyone was happy in these areas, there would be a lot of unemployed project managers. So then going back to, I wish I'd had this democratic surplus concept when I wrote my dissertation. But so in one way, it does create some kind of democratic surplus, but in another way, it doesn't. And this is, I guess that's when I go back to for whom and for what. And I also think that it becomes, I saw a question in the chat before also about like, what's the alternative then? Which is, and I'm seeing that in relation to your question, Stephen, because I was often asked like, but what does it do? What doesn't it do? Like, what could we like do better? And I don't know, but I think we need to in order to know what we should know better, we first have to know how these projects in this context actually work. And they work primarily, like they also work because a goal that you set up in a project, you can make anything measurable. So they're full of these things, these project applications are full of goals that are phrased in terms of, we want more people to feel better about themselves. Now that is a goal that is very hard to measure. And also these projects set the goals quite low, which means that they always meet, from a project management point of view, a successful result, because they do have the deliverables that they state. So the question maybe then going back, why are those deliverables important? Did I answer your question in somewhat of a way, Stephen?
Yeah, I think these are the questions we can be asking. Yes.
Thank you. So that would be me. And I really liked this thinking about like what we can learn from each other as well. And you used a much better word. I think you said, was it nexus thinking?
Yeah, it was. Sorry
Yeah.
to jump in, Malin. I just want to give some time to Peter as well.
Of course, sorry.
You know,
Sorry, I'm sorry. I just got carried away. Go
No, that
ahead.
was excellent. I didn't want to stop you because it was a great discussion there. But Peter, do you want to have a chance to say a few words also for the direct questions there?
Yeah, thanks. I understand, Malin. I get carried away, and I would like to have this seminar going on for another hour. But in respect of the time, and thank you, Stephen and Martina, for the comments. Stephen, you asked about the design of interfaces, and you talked about, in a way, projects as an antidote or alternative to bureaucracy, which is actually touching about Martina's comment as well. Are there limits to projects or projectification? And I think that these both sort of direct at the same direction, which is, I think, thinking about projects maybe not as an alternative to bureaucracy, but exactly a potential complement. Like, what kind of bureaucracy are we talking about? What kind of bureaucracy do we need to make them projects function as well? And in this regard, like, we have a vision of bureaucracy that works pretty much, as you said, like this kind of adhocracy, or even the sort of new public management, or this kind of idea that everything should be flexible and market oriented, and we don't need any stability. The stability comes from the system, from the market. And on the other extreme, we have this kind of a let's say Weberian idea of bureaucracy. And I think that when not only studying this particular case or cases, but also in my later research, I've found that for to bring out the best of these flexible and fluid projects, we need actually to balance it with stability. With this kind of, maybe this is a neo-Weberian approach. This has been argued that we need, for example, in European Union, the mission-oriented policies or some kind of a core in the bureaucracy that keeps an antidote, a long-term vision, in contrast to these short-term engagements, which allows us to think about projects as really as what they are. They are a tool for organizing work, or an organizing way of organizing. And in this way, for example, if we have civil servants who are constantly, there's a high turnover of civil servants who don't know what, like they are doing just their part, their project, so to say, then it is very difficult to write all the details, all the long-term plans, and to safeguard them in bureaucratic documents against this kind of a creative initiatives from the projects. So in a way, like I guess the whole book and the approach here is not to look at just what's going on in the projects, but how do they relate to this wider bureaucracy, and what kind of bureaucracy can support them. So this was probably sort of the response and comment to what you were talking about.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I agree with Peter. We could probably, or some of us at least, could go on and talk about this forever. But I see also that it is very much time to say thank you so much for participating, everyone. And I want to give the last word to Ilaria. You wanted to say a few words, right? So thank you everyone for participating.
I wonder if there's time for one last quick question. So Tom had put in the chat, we also have 2 more questions in the Q&A that unfortunately we won't have time to answer, but maybe we can, Mats, if you can have a look and maybe get in touch with the colleagues, or the colleagues can get in touch with you to pursue those questions. So Tom mentioned, do we have a sense of what sort of social help or support may be more desirable than the projects we're critiquing, and if so, how this may come into being? And then whilst you answer this, I would like to ask Sarah to put our final slides on to promote one of our next events, but that will give us time for you to answer this last question if possible.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I sort of spammed out entirely. I was trying to find the questions in writing. So, but I could maybe invite just to pass this on because I saw that Sebastian Godenhjelm, the co-editor that I mentioned in the beginning, he's here also, but he's under my name in the. Do you want to say a few words or try to answer any of these questions, Sebastian? Or you're not here, or are you?
Hi, everyone. I don't think I can turn on the camera, but can you hear me?
We hear you. Yes.
Great. Very briefly, thank you, everyone, for excellent discussions and questions. Regarding Tom's question, a very good one indeed. Do we have an alternative? Right now, I think we don't, given the magnitude of funding principles that we need to abide by. I do, however, think that in terms of the permanent organizations, I think we need to be a lot more strict on which project ventures we take on. And maybe turning to Martina's questions as well, regarding the limits, I think we do have limits, but it also depends on how well equipped the permanent organizations are, which in turn maybe relates to Stephen's questions about the interfaces. So maybe turning to a more philosophical mode, I think that we occasionally need to step back and try to look back on what all we have accomplished, or think slowly in terms of Kahnemann's arguments. Instead of going fast and always trying to produce the project results, I think we need to take a step back, think about the interfaces more and think slow. Maybe I'll end on this.
That sounds very Finnish to stop there. Thanks, people.
Thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned before, the session will be saved onto our CMS in Touch YouTube channel. You can see the icon there, bottom left. And just to remind you of one of our next big events, we are co-hosting the organization virtual conference, Organization Journal, which will be in December. So have a look at the call for papers to join this event. Thank you all so much for today's event on projectification. It was really, really wonderful to hear your contributions and your thoughts on this. And bye for now.
Bye-bye.
So